2 weeks after former SABC CEO Madoda Mxakwe left the public broadcaster, news broke that day zero could be looming, and it faces a possible business rescue process due to its dire financial situation. Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Mpofu-Walsh. Following years of what seemed like the SABC turning a corner once again, employees are uncertain about what this means for their job security going forward. While media reports quote SABC COO on the matter, the broadcaster has chosen to remain mum on the issue for now. But how serious is the financial situation at the SABC? And what does it mean for the fulfillment of its public mandate? Tonight we ask, is the SABC running on autopilot? To help us understand this issue, we're joined by Aubrey Chabalala, General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, and Hassan Logat of the People's Media Consortium. First, let's watch the scene setter before our discussion, produced by Nono Magong Ngoma.
Ultimately, what must not happen is an SABC that bleeds the fiscus. Bailouts are not a standard operating procedure for successful businesses. They are not a default position. They are not a norm, they are an exception. They must happen in the worst case scenario.
Cautioning the SABC management and its newly appointed board a month ago, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Account, Mkhuleko Hlengwa, was adamant that the public broadcaster must return to profitability. The SABC appeared in front of the committee to explain the lingering financial irregularity issues from the 2021 to 2022 financial year. While the committee was cautiously optimistic that the public broadcaster could finally be turning the corner, it was clear that the financial sustainability of the organization remained a concern.
So there's still a doubt in terms of your ability to continue as a going concern?
We believe that we will still be here 12 months from now, which is the period of consideration of assessment, and hence we've prepared our financial statements on a going concern basis.
The broadcaster said audience ratings were down by about 40%, largely due to the analog switch-off, which made it difficult to be commercially viable. It also said the inflexible regulatory environment made it difficult for the broadcaster to be competitive, when it also has to meet a public mandate requirement of 2 billion rand per year. In 2019-2020 financial year, it received a 3.2 billion rand bailout, which had preconditions attached to it. The board and its management promised to turn around the SABC through what it called the target operating model, but the unions have called into questions management's competence in running an entity like the SABC.
The SABC is out 44 billion rand in license fees money. Now, if they only collected 10% of that money, that would have been 4 billion. It means that the SABC would not have been in a deficit. They would have tripled the profit in that, and nothing has been done. And incidentally, that has been cited as a reason why the SABC is sitting in this financial position. That is squarely something that that top management is responsible for.
In 2020, the SABC itself became the news as staff took to the streets against looming job cuts, which was completed in 2021, with over 600 employees retrenched. Despite this, the broadcaster has failed to ensure financial sustainability, and employees have not received salary increases for 3 consecutive years. The funding model for the SABC remains a lingering question for many years. But with the 2024 national elections looming and the increasingly complex electoral space, with more smaller parties and independent candidates contesting power, it remains to be seen whether the public broadcaster will be able to meet its public mandate of ensuring universal access and coverage across the length and breadth of South Africa.
Welcome back. Mr. Chabalala, thank you very much for joining us. From your perspective and the union vantage point, should we be worried about the SABC's current position, and How did we get here after the hope of the last few years?
Well, good evening to the viewers as well. So we should be worried. In fact, we have raised the alarm 2 years ago. And the very same things that are happening today is something that we have said during the process of Section 189. We have told the SABC board at the time, the Parliament Portfolio Committee at the time, that if they proceed by finding the retrenchment of workers through that lousy turnaround strategy that they call it a fit for purpose, we wouldn't have been here, because one of the main things is that they wanted to deal with the baseline, which is workers, to cut cost. But there were nothing else creating in terms of creating revenue streams. And there's no business that can be successful without looking on its production. And we have said we will lose the quality in terms of the skills amongst workers. We have said that we'll lose the base in terms of the network and the production, because you need to have journalists, you need to have people production and all of that going everywhere else. We have said if you cut that, it means that you might have to insource some of these things. Outsource some of these things. So these are the questions that we have raised.
You've been warning about this for nearly 2 years now. Do you feel that your warnings have been heeded, that some of the warnings you've sounded have been taken seriously?
No. I don't think they've heeded our warning. That's one of the reasons that the voice of workers has not been felt. I mean, I was just listening to the clip now. You hear parliamentarians asking questions as if they are surprised. They are the source of this thing.
Why do you say that?
Well, first and foremost is that we did inform them. They completely ignored it. But fast track, when the board leaves SABC, the previous board, they stayed 6 months without appointing a new board. Now we are told that we have losses of close to R1 billion, which is going to be difficult to account for it. How it get there? The handover was not there. Now they're asking new boards questions that they themselves were sitting with them in the past year. So I'm saying squarely lies on the bottom, on the doorsteps of the parliamentarians.
Absolutely, and we're going to dive into a lot more of those points because we need to untangle them over some time. Mr. Logat, can we start with the first question first? Are you worried about the position of the SABC, and how did we get here after the hope of the turnaround strategy and the notion that the public broadcaster was returning to its glory, its former glory?
Well, for us, quite clearly, we think there should be a national conversation, because the public broadcaster is more important than just the executive, parliament, the unions. It is about us. It helps to shape who we are, and so when you tell me that there's $1 billion shortfall, but when the CEO went out, he was singing praises. There was no sign that this was in the offering, right? The government has to take responsibility, as the last speaker pointed out. We told them about the migration, the rushed migration process from analog to digital. When they lost those viewership, they were told, the president was told it is bad governance not to have a board for 6 months. None of this is a surprise to anybody. But my only concern is, as a former trade unionist, is why is it whenever they have a problem, it's like a bully. You beat someone weaker than you. They want to now talk about that. They retrenched less than 2 years ago 600. Where's the benefit of all that?
Can we talk about that specifically? Because I think that's a really important point that both you and Mr. Chabalala have raised. Is we were told that there were retrenchments to put the organization on a sounder financial footing, and that would open financial space. But if reports are to be believed, then we're back where we started and we've retrenched people. That seems...
I mean, I think it's unfair, because if at least there's a suggestion that workers have to be retrenched, and the other trade unionists mentioned in this insert, there's 44 billion outstanding, right? In terms of licensing fees and stuff like that. Clearly, it looks like it's not the new board's problem. It is this transition period, and the government has to take responsibility. The outgoing CEO and some of the management that have left launched a new DTT program, which promised us rightfully a beautiful concept. 24 hours talking in, hearing the news in our own languages, catering for 10 million people because it is so important. It is about nation building, which is the core agenda, the core mandate of the broadcaster. This is the beginning of this year. These promises were made. The SABC is making a joke of itself, and quite clearly, those noble ideas that were spoken of by Mr. Monare, right, must be carried through, but with the funding from the government, because it is about nation building. The SABC is not responsible for nation building. It articulates what the people feel. It enhances debates. It tries to shape what it is that we should be as a nation, the best of us, because quite clearly, since '94, we're struggling to become a nation. And governing it by neoliberal principles, you'll never get cohesion. The society will always be stuck by divisions and fracases and divisions and fighting each other. And this is not the SABC. It must talk about the better self that we can be.
Mr. Chabalala, just building on that, it seems that there's been an interesting new vision for the news, the way the news is presented to the public. But then there's financial management and just the governance of the corporation. And it seems as though communication there hasn't been right, because on the one hand, a new strategy has been launched, but on the other, almost by surprise, we hear that the finances are not where they need to be for that new vision to be launched. And it's that disjunct that seems a bit disconcerting.
Well, firstly, I fully agree with Comrade Hassan on what he has put, before us here. One of the things is that when you come up with a strategy or a turnaround strategy or fit for purpose, whatever you call it, it has to be costed. You have to say that we'll be implementing this in a certain sequence. And one of the things that they propose, as we have earlier said, is that we have to cut 700 million rand per annum, which was workers at the time, for us to reach that objective in 2023. That clearly defines, I want to run away from issue of communication and say that clearly defines a misleading of a parliament by the previous board. That's what it is, including the new executive, the previous executive at the time. So having said that, but we have to add another point, is that this is a public broadcaster. It has a particular mandate to fulfill. You hear parliamentarians speaks about SABC as a business. It's not a business. It has a mandate that at some stage, part of its mandate cannot generate revenue. And so when we talk about this subsidy, it has to be proportional to address those particular areas. So it's some of the things that are at the center of the discussion. Now the 44.2 billion rands that is said is lost through the TV licensing. Really, that system is outdated of collecting money through TV licensing. And we have said this 2 years ago. Let us develop a system that will be effective. And one of the things is that we have to look into ICASA and the Broadcasting Act. Amongst other things that we have raised is that we have the OTTs that just come into the country, take revenue and leave. We said that there should be a broadcasting levy for such. But unfortunately, we had politicians saying that even smart cars must pay, something that is not tangible in terms of coming to creating revenue. Right. So those are the areas that we are raising, that a public broadcaster have to be innovative. The public broadcaster has to compete in the space. But even when you bring about these noble ideas of DTT, you ought to think about those who might not have access on the internet, those who are in the outskirts of the country. How will they get this broadcasting? That's why we're talking about these decoders that are not coming, and so on and so forth. So it has to go back to that point.
Let's put that viewpoint to Mr. Logat and get his response, particularly on the deeper question of the public mandate versus the commercial sustainability of the SABC.
Yeah, if you look at, there are other public broadcasters in the world, they are all over. The BBC is an oft-quoted example. And I think what we need to do here is to think of long-term funding that is sustainable and removed from political interference. So maybe the Parliament must vote for For 10 years, this is the money that the SABC should get, because its agenda is such to contribute to democracy, development of society, gender equality. We do not discuss enough how the scourge, the abuse of women, the killing of women is an everyday offense, right? We regard it as normal. These kind of things, the example is the Spanish TV station, public broadcaster, actually raises this every time when these things happen. Now, when you talk about that and strengthening the spiritual and moral fiber of society, I didn't write this. This precedes our activism today. But they do not invest in it. It looks like it's from one management to the other. This is not. These things must stand alone. They're a public good. They're part of our commons. They help us to achieve this. You need to put aside money and not play politics. And why is it that the same administration, we changed, how many ministers of communications have we had, comrade? Is it 14 since the time? I remember Motsepe Kasavu restarting this migration from analog, and we changed them at will, right? It just doesn't make sense. Someone has to stay, and the one way out is sustained funding so that the SABC can deliver on the public mandate. But also, very, very good programs can be made. We, in civil society, I work with mining affected communities, would like to hear our stories. People in the Boer Kaap, various places, also have stories to be told. And the fact that people are trying to tell their own stories means that the public broadcaster must be available to provide that. And this synergy between community broadcasting, social media groupings, etc., we are producing content in the People's Media Consortium. There should be lively interaction between what civil society is doing, what public at large are doing, and then the SABC can be invigorated. But to try and cut more workers from what they've cut, the SABC is a human-led body, right? It is not machines that are telling the story. The elections, who's going to get the news behind the news? If not the public broadcaster. If you leave it to the private sector, only those whose interests are with money will get coverage. The public broadcaster is a great leveler. We must take it more seriously.
We're discussing the public broadcaster, its crucial role in our society, and also the need for its commercial sustainability. This is in light of recent reports that the broadcaster is facing dire financial straits. Do stick with us, and also make sure to comment on social media at SABC Unfiltered. What are your views of the current situation? Remember that we also did ask for the SABC and the Department of Communications, who are not prepared to speak on this matter at the moment. But of course, this will be a long-running debate, and we'll be focusing on it as it unfolds. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more on this discussion after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. Mr. Chabalala, of course, before we continue our conversation, just to also say that we invited the Portfolio Committee as well, and they weren't prepared to speak at this time on your point about Parliament, but we'll come back to that. I wanted to just go to some of the financial questions because the term business rescue has been mentioned. But can we go back in history a bit and just talk about this bailout? Because there was a 3.2 billion rand bailout, which was purported to put the SABC on a new financial trajectory. What do you think went wrong with that financial windfall to the point where now we might be in the same financial position that precipitated the bailout in the first place?
Well, firstly, I think it's a culture of zero accountability. And that culture is informed by what we've seen has been happening. No one will be held accountable. And from the beginning, when that money was put in, it was said that it will have certain conditions which were not clearly defined to us as a trade union and the public. What are those conditions? But then that's where we are now. It's because of those things that are talking to issues of accountability, corporate governance, and all of
What kind of accountability do you think could have been put in place and should be in place going forward? What kind of measures would you propose?
I think measures are there. It's just that they undermine. There is a Public Broadcasters Act. There's also, we have a board that have to, make sure that it runs its fiduciary duties in terms of looking to the executive. The board must then go to Parliament. All those processes are there. It's a question of a human implementation. If they don't, then we find ourselves in this space. I mean, it is clear that SABC should not stay without a board, but it happened. 6 months, the entire period of 6 months without a board. So those cracks have led us to be where we are today.
Mr. Logat, what went wrong with this bailout? Because this was supposed to be the windfall that set things on a new trajectory, and yet here we find ourselves. What do you think went wrong that can be remedied in the future so that this doesn't become a perpetual cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that if you under-resource the broadcaster, you keep making it uncertain. The workers don't know from one day to the other that they will have a job or not. And I mean, one thought after the 600 workers were retrenched, right, that there'll be stability. The management, the last board served out his term. And then, of course, you found that the president, a lawyer, lapsed in his concentration. For whatever reason, didn't appoint a board. He had to be taken to court. Again, the SOS, Public Broadcasting Coalition, Media Monitoring Africa, had to join in as friends of the court, making public service accountability noises in court, basically telling court this is the mandate and why the SABC is important. They joined ETV. Why is it every time we have to fight our own government? A government, in fact, our president is one of the co-authors of the Constitution, with, of course, speaking on mandates, etc. But he is knowledgeable of it, of what is contained in the Constitution. But why is it that we, civil society groups, unions, NGOs, have to all the time argue with the government that you have to be accountable to the values, the spirit, and the letter of the Constitution? Why is it that we have to take you to court and spend much needed money that could be used for other programming in our work? We have to take you to court to make sure that you listen to your mandate. I was active, and as you can scan the SABC, speaking for Safe Free TV. We advocated on all the channels here about why this migration should not be hastily done, because large numbers of people, the working poor, will not be able to get the set-top boxes. And all this thing that Chaveni spoke about, this idea that the internet is the magic bullet and that the TV will be outdated, people will be watching on their phones. I don't know which world are these guys living in. Clearly, they're not in the townships.
It's interesting, and it takes me to a deeper question, as questions of business rescue have been floated, about whether, in actual fact, we as a country want the SABC to run on these exact commercial profit margins, or whether we actually say to ourselves, look, the public good is worth this much to us, and therefore we're prepared to put this amount aside. And that may be a loss commercially, but we think that's offset socially. And actually just have that honest conversation rather than saying we're going to get to this magical commercial figure.
Maybe we were born at the wrong time. We were born when neoliberalism reigned supreme in the world, right? And it looked like anything else that talks about redress and reconstruction. I remember, I was a unionist before my comrade there, that when you used to go in to negotiate with management, they used to all have copies of the RDP, they're largely white management, to show that they've read the book that is important. That was ditched after 2 years. And then a year came in, and then full force neoliberal agenda came into place. People have so much hope in South Africa that we can turn things around to make sure that the poor and working people can have a just life, a better life than before. Because apartheid, if anything, was about serving the elites, dividing the oppressed, dividing all the communities, right? And therefore, white workers and others were co-opted, making sure that black workers earn peanuts to sustain this idea of the South Africa that we have. Where are those redress programs? Where's the discussions around raw materials initiative, where Europe and others are putting out an act to say we must sell all our raw materials to them, right? And we don't have beneficiation and stuff inside. The public broadcaster is not touching this because it's worried about survival. Really, too many debates. If you want to quantify that, these debates are not a loss. They benefit to society.
Mr. Chabalala, of course, feel free to build on anything that's been said or disagree or agree, but you raised the question of parliamentary accountability, and as mentioned, we invited certain members of the Portfolio Committee to be accountable themselves. What role is Parliament playing in this problem? Because the parliamentary oversight has pointed many fingers, but at the same time, they always seem to be caught by surprise too. So to what extent do you think Parliament is at fault here for not holding the SABC accountable appropriately as it should?
Well, first is a question of popularity and being celebrities. Our parliamentarians enjoy to be on social media and be cited on TV. That's why they will ask questions as if they were not there before. So that's the first point. But the parliament is at the heart, and I agree completely with the veteran trade unionist, Comrade Hassan, on the neoliberal policies that have come about. And some of the things, perhaps we should have a discussion whether they should be reversed or not. One of those is a Centec that was separated from SABC. I mean, that is a network platform provider. If SABC could still have Centec by now, it will outsmart and outdo any private sector in this instance. For example, one of the rival of SABC as we speak has its own base and its broad platform. That's why it has so many channels with one license, because it can effectively participate in the space when they talk about spectrum and all of that. So SABC separated this thing, and I don't understand, there's no rationale to that, to separate the Centec and SABC. And that was a decision again of Parliament. So at the heart of all of these things, including the accountability, including it's at the doorstep of parliamentarians. And why, that's a very fundamental question. Why do you have NGOs, trade unions, and all of those things fighting for something that is written down in the Constitution? It was something else if we were demanding something very new. And at the end of the day, all the time, workers and the poor are at the receiving end of these wrong decisions. Because today they talk of business rescue, the first thing that they'll talk about, it will be retrenchment, so that they can be able to cut costs, but they won't look at the impact of that retrenchment. So the debate should be, what type of a public broadcaster we want to see in the modern day, and how then do we want to reformulate it so that we can be able to take it forward and make it self-sustainable. And it's true what we are saying. Let us not treat the public broadcaster as a private sector commercial broadcaster. It should be treated as a public broadcaster. You will understand that it does not need to bring such a margin of profit, but it has to reinvest in giving our society education, information, sports, and all other things. Everything has deteriorated. There's no sports at SABC. It's gone to private sector. Our people are deprived. There's no vast entertainment from the public broadcaster. It's gone to private sector. Again, our people have been deprived. Now, if you take it to the business rescue, there's a risk that even at the point of elections, about informing the public about all the political parties and their promises, the information will be limited because the budget will have shrunk and it will be unable to go in the vast of their society and broadcast those things. So it's a national issue that we're talking about, which can lead to a national crisis.
Just building on the last point there and the business rescue proposal, what are your thoughts on that? Because look, on the one hand, we also have to appreciate that the financial position, if accurately reported, is dire. So something certainly has to be done. The question is just, what's the appropriate balance? And
part of my thing is so cynical. We used to be so willing to bail out our SAA, and how many people really fly? I heard Comrade Monare talk about how 10 million people rely solely on the SABC for their news, which means that in the family, they talk about this. So clearly, SABC has such a wide reach. It is undermining its potential to create a sense that we are a winning nation. We always talk these things, but they don't have the strategy for it. So to be honest with you, You don't want business rescue. You want South African rescue, and the SABC must play a role in it. We don't even have a national development strategy that can unify us. Whatever the faults of the RDP were, we used to know that through meeting basic needs, we were democratizing society. We had a target, how many people's homes will be electrified. Of course, the issues about the maintenance of those were not discussed. So whenever you want to discuss any progress for black people, you can see if you rely solely on social media and private media, the agenda of some who are against progress precedes us. When you want to try and say, we want more water rights in the agricultural sector for black people, oh, it's already, the message is negative. We're always playing defensive when we want to try and talk about how to advance transformation 30 years after our changes. As he said, SABC is critical. But having said that, we do not endorse a state broadcaster. We want a public broadcaster that allows our voices to defend them. Again, yeah, we are defending the public broadcaster. Where's Parliament? Where's the board? Where's the senior executive? The former executive director who left must come back and account. He made a lot of promises. They passed a number of projects in a time when there's no board, and they got airtime for it. So clearly, don't blame the workers. Management must be the first. Maybe we should learn from Japan. They have to commit harikiri. The Japanese will let the top guys cut themselves, not the bottom people. So let them start from the top, then we'll follow.
We're discussing the public broadcaster. We're looking at recent reports of a dire financial position and also questioning and thinking about new models and new ways forward. Participate in the conversation on social media at SABC Unfiltered. Let us know what your thoughts are on the debate. And we'll be back to talk more about the future of the public broadcaster, its funding models, and also the period without a board and the impact that that has had. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Unfiltered. Mr. Logat, there have been many different state-owned enterprises that have faced, shall we say, headwinds over the last decade, 2 decades. One of them is the post office, and in many ways, we've seen a forerunner of this attempt to go into business rescue, to go the fiscal discipline route, and it also hasn't borne particular fruit. How do you see that case study against the SABC and what can be learned from it?
I think the comrades either the top layers of our officials are overstaffed, but clearly underthinking. I mean, I have occasion to come to Spain, so some of my examples are about that. You enter a public library in a local area of Spain, and you'll be shocked to find out you can get movies there. You can get music, CDs. You could get magazines and books in it. Don't tell me that they are a wealthy country. It's the way they configure the democracy that is located sometimes with a resource that local authorities get to kind of make some services work. So yeah, it looks like there are so many gaps in our society that the democracy at the level where it matters most is the weakest, and what we need to do is that probably for the next show is to bring in these other people, have a town hall before the election discussion, and where we can talk about how we can turn this around. Talking about the post office, the post offices in other countries have actually learned, right, that they could be more reliable. They could provide other facilities to make sure, because nothing stops you because you public service not to follow creative ideas. What we demand in public service is the impartiality, the access to the service, the accountability, to make sure that it's reliable, right? That you don't get into fake news and stuff like it, that it's there for all the people. This is the public service values. So similarly, what we need to do is that quality public services for the poor. We have to start seeing how much the poor have had to carry the burdens of it. That's why we fought so hard to make sure, don't simply say you give set-top boxes and this deadline is a mythical one. After so many years, you have not even met it. So clearly, we have to just be imaginative and get, maybe, if you don't want to employ these expensive people, get retired people who can do this for half the price. But there are so many lessons. Look at public libraries. I used to be a librarian after I was expelled from Teachers Training College. I mean, of course, under apartheid. The libraries look like they're dead zones in some areas. But you go in other countries where there's internet access, especially where the digital divide is so wide. We just have to be imaginative to make sure that all these promises that we talk about, we don't just talk about them, we do them first, and then we say we've done that. So clearly, I think there's a lack of imagination amongst our leadership, and quite frankly, I'm quite bored with the stale answer that when they have a problem, you retrench the person. How much more can you retrench at the SABC? How much more?
What's your view, Mr. Chabalala, on the post office as a case study for the SABC?
Well, firstly, when you walk inside the post office buildings and you walk inside the SABC buildings, you find similarities. No maintenance, everything is falling apart, and so on and so forth. When you go to workers, morale is low. And all of these things is based on one thing. The decisions that are taken by the executive has run this institution down the drain. And there is no accountability. I'll keep on saying that. At the end of the day, workers have to take the blame through retrenchments, through no increase. I mean, at SABC it's almost 3 years. At post office it's 5 years, no increases, salary increases. But you expect those workers to be productive. Today at SABC, there's many vacancies that are not filled. People have to do dual shift to cover the decisions made by the executive of retrenching workers. Same thing is happening at the post office. If, for example, if you look at this Department of Communication, which at some stage was separated, telecom, postal, and communication, on average, in 10 years, it has a minister per year, if we were to say in average. So it shows you there's instability in the sector. And the minister, what becomes a problem is that when the minister comes in, it's if it's a new government. So everything else cuts off. And this one is starting afresh, is asking the very same question that the previous minister was asking, and so on. So it's a vicious cycle. And that's where we are. So the issue of, we need to question this in the neoliberal state, because if you can be silent about it, it will be perpetual. The issue of private sector and the influence and its expressed voice in parliament, that has to be questioned. Sidelining or silencing the poor and the working class in general.
Well, one of the questions is also about the corporate world and how it interfaces with the public broadcaster, and also the importance it places on the public broadcaster as a venue for advertising, and you know, there are questions to be asked there as well about some of the differential treatment,
absolutely,
in the way that the corporate world looks at the public broadcaster, and accountability there is also important, just as it is within.
Absolutely, that's a point that I was getting into. If you look at one of the biggest radio stations, Ukhozi FM, if we were to compare that with some small commercial private sector somewhere, private radio, we must look at the advertising cut to say how much they prepared to pay for Ukhozi vis-a-vis for previously white-dominated radio station that is commercialized. You'll see that there's element of discrimination in it. And those are the questions, these are not nice questions to ask, but are questions that we need to drill down on, so that we can be able to, when we talk about the realigning and rebalancing of the nation, we have to question those things. So the role of the private sector, even at the demise of the post office, needs to be questioned. Because in post office, there's an act of exclusivity of 0 to 1 kg delivery. Don't we see Uber Eats doing that? So it shows you that the private sector plays a massive role in destroying the SOEs, and it finds its voice expressed through the parliament, because when they approve this business rescue, it's clearly to shut down or to limit. We've seen what they've done with SAA, We are seeing what they're doing with the South African Post Office. It's coming here. And these are some of the things that we've said up front to say there is a clear direction of shutting down all the SOEs. They have similar problems. It's not as if they have different problems. But when you look at the business prospects, if we are to talk business, all these SOEs, if you look at a network of post office, no one should compete with it. If you look at the vast coverage of SABC, no one should compete with it. But unfortunately, these are the dying institutions, those who don't have the platform, those who don't reach out to the poor, those who don't reach out to the outskirts of the country, are the ones that are actually in the forefront in terms of commercial, in terms of getting adverts and all of those things. So as a country, we need to debate that particular question.
How would you enter that debate, Mr. Logat, and the interface of private power and private commercial power and the public broadcaster? There's a story to be told there too, notwithstanding
I want to go there.
Public
I want to go there, but let me tell you when as I was hearing my comrade speak, I went to our local post office when we were doing research around the set-top boxes, and I'm surprised some people go there because it looks like you could be mugged. The grass is so long, the lights don't work. When you get your post there, it's dark. I still have a post box in my area, right? And so clearly it looks like, and this is what happens generally, as has been pointed out, that they run the institution down, make it ripe for some other agenda, because clearly I can't see our democracy being taken over by the wallet, right? But increasingly it has been weakened, where the ballot has no real value anymore. And what you're suggesting here, and what your question implies, is that every time we are reliant on advertising to get our public service message, there are competing messages, right? That the one negates the other one is done quite sexily, and the other one is under-resourced. Clearly something must be done. In some places where public broadcasting still reigns, and I used an example earlier of one country, one of the channels actually is free from advertising. The others have advertising. So these are models that we can learn, and you don't have to fly around, pay big trips for study trips. You can do research on the internet, you can phone people, workers can talk to other workers. There can be other ways of saving the public broadcaster outside the corporation. There you have a worker inside. The workers are the front line of our democracy. They can tell us, as they often do, this is going to happen. We need to start with them, not make them the enemy, but use them as a resource that can enlighten us, and they will love their work more. But if you keep beating up someone every time, no wonder some of them don't even want to come to work.
And what's crucial, and we'll go to this a bit more after the break as well, is that we do have a big election coming up, and so the role of the public broadcaster will be more important than ever in making sure that coverage is fair, coverage is balanced, that coverage informs the public ahead of that important choice. What are your thoughts on this moment converging on one of the most crucial moments for any public broadcaster, a watershed election?
Yes, absolutely. And the timing thereof of these reports, it comes at a time where we are about to go into the space of elections. And it can raise a number of questions. If we were to save SABC as government, how did that appear to be? It seems like there's a current government here, this particular party, and all of those things. So the timing of it is also questionable. So those are some of the areas that we want to raise up.
Absolutely. Well, you've whet our appetites for that discussion. Let's pay the bills, and then we'll come back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing the importance of the public broadcaster and recent reports of its financial instability. Motusi on Twitter, as we go to some of your comments on social media, says the problem... I've just lost the tweet there. I'm sure we'll get it back in due course. But Mr. Chabalala, before we went to the break, we were talking about the importance of the election and the centrality of the election for the public broadcaster. Can you continue on that trend?
Yes, you'll understand that the public broadcaster plays a role in a democracy. And why we're saying that is that it has to bring on every political party that is campaigning to everyone in South Africa. So it should not be those who, have enough funds to go and campaign and reach every area or corner of South Africa. But every political party must have a space to campaign and express its views, so that our people, when they go and cast their vote, is based on informed decision. And the person that can do that, or the institution that can do that, is a public broadcaster. Now, if we don't have a public broadcaster that does that, you run a risk of actually undermining the democracy. So the public broadcaster plays a significant role. Hence, I was saying earlier on, also the timing of these reports and also the challenges that we see around SABC raise a certain flag. It could be just a suspicion, but it raises a flag. So we ought to be careful on how we approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Logat, your thought on the election coming up and the importance of this moment for the country and the public broadcaster's position within that?
I mean, the elections has been poised to say that the ANC may not get its 50%. So this makes it a very interesting election. The Party of Liberation, under some problem and challenges by the EFF, the Democratic Alliance and others. So clearly it's more important than others. But all elections are important because it's taking the ordinary person seriously. Mutusi's tweet, which they left for us to see, was that he says that they were concentrating on those areas where you could get license arrangements, like the historically white power bases, Western Cape, Joburg, Gauteng, and KZN, those cities. So I guess it's true, because we have to even remind the minister and others about the rural poor, the working poor, and those kind of things. But the SABC, for a long time coming, had changed. So it's not just a sudden one. Is that they, in the 90s, when we were campaigning, they used to have a slogan that the SABC was a model employer. A model. Can you believe it? And it's not a fake news, look it up. But it is no longer there, because they know they are not a model employer, right? Also, for 14 years, many of us, I was in the unions then, with Workers' World, we produced a program called Workers on Wednesday, a radio program. All of a sudden, 3 years ago, we were told that the program will not air any longer. It was a radio program coming on around about 11:30, 12 o'clock, 11:30 in the morning on Wednesday, and they stopped it, right? Because it wasn't bringing in money. They said they will get something else with a sponsor. Even that hasn't come forward. So it looks like we want to sponsor our national discourse by the private sector, and you want to have a level playing discussion, a level playing field by the referee of this debate being those with money. It just doesn't work like that. We had other values. We had the Freedom Charter. We had other political principles that we hold dear. We have a constitution, right? So that was going to be our redress too. But unfortunately, the guts seem to have gone out. And every time our leaders want to take a tentative step, new liberal political parties make sure that, they will steal the money. Every country is developed with theft, right? That we need to control the corruption, but it should not be the reason why we don't do things. It should not be the reason. Every country in the world, at certain stages, they had to lock up people for stealing, but it does not stop the race, the struggle, the dire poverty and hunger that people suffer. You cannot say you can't produce food because they'll steal it. You can't have a public health system because they'll steal the money. I mean, what logic is that? As if the private sector does not have any corruption. I mean, really.
Closing thoughts, Mr. Chabalala, and maybe if briefly reflecting on what you'd like to see as the way forward and how we can rescue the situation and move into a more positive and stable future.
Yes, just to add on that point, we must not forget that SABC has closed many regional branches of SABC where it limited the access from those areas outside Gauteng, outside the urban areas. That's another point. But going forward, we need the involvement of everyone because public broadcaster belongs to everyone. Two, we need to have a plan. When you turn around things, you need to have a sustainable plan of 2 years and of 10 years. And that must be funded by the government. So once we have a plan, and that plan will be regularly monitored, and we must have all the stakeholders sitting in the monitoring process, whether it can sit annually or whatever the case may be, to make sure that there's no deviation from that particular plan, and to make sure that we bring back the public broadcaster, not a state broadcaster. So those are very key things that we need to do, so that everyone we can have a process that is inclusive, whether it's the cultural aspect of things, whether it's the issues of the society, the poor communities, whether it's the rich and so on. But we have an inclusive and integral part that will take the SABC forward. The last point that we must emphasize, we'll fight tooth and nail. We'll have Comrade, the veteran, yourself. We must be in the forefront of the campaign in defense of this institution. And that campaign needs to be coordinated by all parties, not only by trade union, so that workers do not get retrenched. But it's very important that in this state of economy, it cannot be that only parliamentarians are receiving salary increases. And when it comes to workers, we are then told that there's no money and so forth. We are going to demand that salary increase as well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chabalala. Mr. Loga, thank you very much for your insights. We'll just go to some of those comments on social media as we close out the show. And I'd like to thank you for joining us as well this evening. We don't seem to have those social media comments. I know you can see them on your screen, so you will be able to read them. The problem started when the SABC focused on TV licenses instead of investing money on programs, no repeats. That would pull companies to purchase and spaces. I am in the Northwest and I feel like the SABC is not catering to me. It focuses on Gauteng, Western Cape and KZN communities. That's Motusi's tweet. Thank you very much for that tweet, Motusi. Let's go to one more tweet, and that's Dumelo. SABC should compete with MultiChoice and other online streams for profit. Of course, however, those that can't pay should be limited to those free channels, your SABC 1, 2, 3 and ETV. But for quality, let those who can pay. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think this conversation has been a demonstration of the importance of a public broadcaster that not only ensures a fair and balanced, informative public, but is also capable of self-criticism. And only through public funding can we have a public broadcaster which is not only able to give you the information that can inform your choices, but look inward and criticize itself. We thank you for joining us this evening. We look forward to continuing the conversation on social media. Have a good evening and see you on the next installment of Unfiltered.